Life. Right, well, I will welcome everybody. I'll turn to the screen. Good morning, colleagues. No, you're not watching this morning with Phil and Holly. If you did, Phil's clearly took a turn for the worst if you're looking at me like this, but welcome everybody who's joined us. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's session with Paul Campbell. I certainly did. And really looking forward to our next session with Lisa in a couple of minutes. Apologies for the slight delay, just usual sort of technical issues in terms of getting the Zoom to sort of work. Nothing here in the studio, I might add. But I do hope you enjoyed yesterday. Just a couple of domestic things. If you could just make sure your mics are muted. It was really nice hearing the order for the skinny latte with sprinkles yesterday, but perhaps we can do without that one today. And also, again, as usual, if you wouldn't mind just saying hi in chat, let us know where you're from. We had people in from the Wirral and Qatar yesterday, so it would be good to know where you are, what the weather conditions are like, that sort of thing. It would be nice to sort of break the ice. And of course, please post any comments or chat in there. I see them all coming through on my screen, and it's great to have that level of interaction because that's what we want. You don't just want to sort of be listening to me all morning. So as the second of our three stories about leadership, innovation, and all things sort of disruption, I'm delighted to be joined from Piedmont, not from Silicon Valley this time, by the wonderful Lisa Gansky. Some of you may have come across Lisa before. She's a world-renowned author, serial investor, serial entrepreneur, TED speaker, proper instigator. I met her about 8 or 9 years ago now, and I remember having a lovely chat with her. I think it was about when she was talking about The Future is Sharing, one of her publications, and I really found her extremely stimulating, insightful, and challenging about some of the business and the operating models that we've got, and particularly how we as leaders need to go sort of rethink about the way that we run our organization. So I'm delighted that Lisa is here today, and hopefully we're going to sort of share some of those insights and help you as we come back. So I will turn to my screen here and I can see Lisa there. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Ian. Thank you so much for the invitation. I've really been looking forward to this and your famous sofa, your world famous sofa.
It certainly is. It's really comfortable for about 60 minutes. After that, I start to
you've got a wiggle.
I've got a wiggle. So if I'm doing that, it's not because I'm bored with you. It's just because of my, anyhow, little too much information. So
well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for everyone joining. I'll really look forward to our conversation. Ian gave me a little bit of background. I've read some, and I have some familiarity, having worked with some cities about, in general, the challenges of housing and thinking about communities. So it's a topic that's near, and at this moment in our history, it's a topic that's very near and dear to me. So I have one question for you guys. Is this blurry background weird, or?
It's okay, Lisa. It's okay for me anyhow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's nothing to hide. It's just a cool little library. But I looked at it suddenly. I'm like, Anyway, I'll really look forward to the conversation. I know Ian has me on a program. So maybe, do you want me to jump in and give a little background and then we can carry on?
Yeah, if you could sort of tell us a bit about yourself, and then you've got some slides to sort of share with us as well. So, to tell us again, I did a bit of introduction.
Sure. Let me give you some background. I would say that, I am an entrepreneur, which I always say is French for can't hold a job. I feel that I'm a terrible employee, but a pretty good entrepreneur. They, in one of the projects, we started a very early, in fact, the first commercial website on the internet in 1993, because it was meant to be something else, and it turned into a website by mistake. And we sold it to AOL, and I was actually the head of internet stuff at AOL, because at the time the internet was weird and AOL was this walled, manicured place. So we were kind of their hedge play. They bought our company and let me run this thing. And it was really interesting and amazing, and incredible time, early internet. I started a company called Ophoto with some friends because my parents were going to kill me. I was living in California, taking pictures of my family in Philadelphia. And so we created a photo sharing site that grew really quickly, actually, to 26 million people, sold it to Kodak. And then at Kodak, I ran digital photography services for 4.5 years until, the film crashed and all the mess that was predicted. So the Kodak story is very relevant to us, I think. The short version is, when I joined Kodak, I was asked to give a presentation to the senior board and the senior executives, which were like 350 people. And they wanted me to talk about the future of photography. And I don't know. So I took a couple of days and I came up with some crazy ideas. And I showed up with a little suitcase in Rochester, New York. And I pulled out of my suitcase in a Linksys box, a router taped to a really those old brick cell phones that weigh, like 3 pounds. And then a Brownie camera, which was Kodak's first, you touch the button and we do the rest kind of little square camera that you probably have seen in photos at least. And I pulled it out and said, this is the future of photography. And everybody laughed. I showed a bunch of numbers about how we were moving more towards, these things that we're now kind of addicted to. You can't probably see, but I'm holding up, a mobile phone. And that they were going to become the remote control for life, blah, blah, blah. And the CFO of Kodak, a very conservative guy, stood up on his desk and said, give her whatever she wants. I was like thinking, holy crap, I didn't expect that. Okay. So I'm a salesperson because I'm an entrepreneur. You always have to sell, right? So I wrap up my stuff and throw it in a suitcase, pull myself off stage thinking anything else I say can only make it worse. And I sit down next to this French guy, executive of the company, who's been there for a while. And I say to him, something very eloquent, like, holy crap, what just happened? And he puts his arm around me and he says, something in French. I don't speak French. I say, I don't know what that means. And he says, in France, we have an expression. It is the sight of the guillotine clarifies the mind. And so with that, I just say that, we're at this intersection, right, of the many things changing in the world. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today, is really this idea that we're moving from a really a kind of what I call a social operating system, a way of seeing and thinking about the world that we all grew up in, that we were trained in, that we've practiced in, that we're experts in. That I call the century of the generals, the 20th century. It was top down, one to many, built on the military model, education systems, the way cities are designed, corporations, health systems, everything was very top down, one to many. And generally the dude with the machines is the boss, always a dude. And, and then it was the idea was ready, aim, 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 aim some more, eventually fire, because your production systems and your way of thinking are about centralizing and scaling and reducing risk and scaling some more. In the 21st century, we're all the dude with the machine. So are we all the boss? The production systems, the way that we communicate, the power distribution, many things have changed. In my opinion, we're in this moment between these two really important kind of ontologies or social operating systems. The things that we grew up with, the way that we think, what we expect from people, what we think people expect from us, who trusts us, who doesn't trust us, who we think we have access to, how we think we move in the world. All of those things and the institutions around them are part of no more. And the no more is in pretty rapid dissolution. And then if we squint, we could see the not yet, the things, the systems, the practices, the models, the expectations, the biases that are coming into practice, but the scaffolding is still around it. And it's not really, you can't like let go of this vine and jump onto this one with the same veracity. We, being in the middle, have two choices, especially as leaders. We can either cry, hold on to the no more, and say stuff like, if you can only last another 5 to 7 years until I retire, I'd really appreciate it, you know? Or we kind of accelerate the not yet. We work together to figure out what the hell is this thing going to look like? How do we really make it happen? Let's like listen and talk and work with other people because we're at a loss. And so those are really the two only choices we have. My bias is, of course, to accelerate the not yet, but it's very hard when you're running often a very incumbent organization with different expectations. To flesh out a little bit more about the 20th and 21st century, we can see that there's like polar opposites. 20th century strategies were get big. Kodak had 85,000 people, own and control. One of the first weddings that George Eastman did with Kodak film, the film was contaminated because the agar came from a third party. So he decided, no, we're going to own the cows to make the bones, to make the agar, to make the film that eventually no one bought. So this vertically integrated thing of control and stability, really essential. In the 21st century, we see that things are changing too quickly, that people need to be more agile. And so small, open, shared, integrated, more of a kind of iterative interaction is really what's working. Also, another way to see it is to think about the 20th century as a very hierarchical method, orientation, and expectation. The 21st century is more relational, like in ecology. It's who you relate to, how you're connected to them, or if you're connected to them, that gives the resilience. Then if we think about risk, and on the other side, value creation, in the 20th century, the strategy was don't have risk. I mean, reduce risk by reducing mistakes. That's how you do it. And so zero mistakes. Remember all the Japanese, manufacturing practices and things like this, that was driving towards zero mistakes. In the 21st century, where things are changing so rapidly, and we're mostly walking around with like this, like what? Facial expression. Trying to have no mistakes means that we're not learning. And if we're not learning, then we're going to have certain death. The risk factor goes up enormously unless we're built to learn. And so one of the questions I have for us is, how do we do that? How do we incorporate a learning engine into the fundamental part of our operating model, our organization, our partnerships, etc.? Again, in the 20th century, we were all about conquering nature. We were about, it's an extraction model, whether it's oil and gas and fuels, if it's water, if it's minerals, but also just population and the way that we built things and the way that we generate waste, or the materials that we choose to use, and the fact that they are toxic and don't get integrated, but we don't care because there's plenty of space until there wasn't. So in the 21st century, now we have different challenges, and those challenges are, I think, forcing us, or aggressively at least nudging us into what I refer to as a natural collaboration, regenerative ideas about communities and practices, and how we work together across communities, but also how do we work within communities and nature. For me, like I have so much noise in my head from listening to and reading and talking to lots of different people and all of that, that I needed some format or some framework to think about how to organize things. This is a model that I've fleshed out a little bit, but it's basically from a Dr. Yitzhak Adizes from about 40 years ago. And he basically took a normal biological life cycle model and applied it to corporate life cycles. So, an idea, a curiosity starts a project or starts a question. It can create a product or bring a team together, open a discussion, start having back and forth with customers or people who maybe want to participate in the community or build something together. And eventually, if it's going to become, for example, a business, it reaches stability that therefore it has a product, a customer, a business model, and it can kind of just stop right there and stay there for quite a long time. And then ultimately, if you're lucky, you move into aristocracy, where you're the Google of something, or you're the John Lewis of something, or you're the whatever the right brand is in the different segments. And that's the aristocracy moment, Netflix. And then typically what happens is the aristocrats are busy, being excited about how great they are, fall into bureaucracy, which is a lot of overhead, a lot of squeezing juice from the fruit until you basically miss the opportunity for future innovation. And so if you draw a vertical line between the axis and the top where stability is, everything to the left of the line is value creation. Innovation, laboratories, research and development, screwing things up, failures, all of that falls into the left side. To get it to the right side, we need to learn. We need to figure out like, well, why didn't that work? And ask lots of questions and get really savvy about not going like, crap, it didn't work, let's not tell anyone. It's more like, wow, how do we gain from what didn't work here, and how do we fine tune and be agile? On the right side is value capture. So most of us, especially in big organizations, have a lot of muscle memory about squeezing juice from the fruit, how to make this more efficient, how to get more out of what we already have, not how to question and make more out of we don't know what. So this is a really important, for me, a really important model. And if we look at where the no more and the not yet is, we can see that the value capture is waning. And value creation is coming up into, that's where all the innovation is. That's where the opportunity for building future goodness lies. I ask myself this question a lot. My answer is always like, absolutely not. I'm not learning as fast as the world is changing. So that kind of pushes me into a lean forward position. I don't know about you guys and how you answer the question. I'm guessing it's probably no. And so if we look at part of, how do you know if you're learning? Well, some things are breaking. If everything's perfect, like you're doing innovation and it's all on schedule, on a perfect schedule, sticking to budget and time frame, probably not innovation. Then, like, again, thinking about production systems against this model of value creation and value capture, new frontiers, new partnerships, new questions, new products, new business models, new frontiers. That's all on the innovation side. Old stuff that you're making money from. And listen, like a lot of banks and big companies that I work with, their old conquests are what are generating all of the revenues and all the great profits, and will continue to do so for probably the next 2 or 3 years. But they'll run out of steam because those deals that were closed, they pay off now, but they'll wane in the future. So new frontiers are essential. And if we go back to the 20th, 21st century thing, the 20th century model was about accumulation. It's centralized production systems. The dude with the machines is the boss. It's very much the century of the generals, General Motors, General Electric, General Dynamics, full of generals. So, and value creation lied there. The decentralized network works an entirely different way. Value and trust is created by diverse collisions, experiments, conversations, experiments, learning, experiments. Lots of things won't work, but figuring out, hey, this is moving us to here. This is definitely something we want to sell off. This doesn't work anymore. So it's a lot of network outreach and what I call collisions, banging into people and opportunities and making your evaluations and learning. When I was writing the book, The Mesh, which I lived in Berkeley at the time, and my neighbors asked me what I was doing. I said I was writing a book about the sharing economy. What? It's like this idea that we're going to share stuff and my neighbor who's like, this is Berkeley, California. I don't know how much you know about Berkeley, California, but my neighbor actually called me a communist, which in Berkeley is high praise. So, so here I remember somebody saying to me, well, why in the hell would I want to spend a night, pay money and spend night in somebody else's bedroom? That's absurd, Ganski. Once again, you're out of your mind. If we take the 20th and the 21st century models next to each other, the Intercontinental Hotel is the most valuable, largest hotel chain on the planet. And it is a great embodiment of the incumbent 20th century model. It's vertically integrated, it owns stuff. It's successful, it's large, its market cap over the last 10 or 12 years has gone from 9 to 13 billion. It's around 12 right now today, but that's the general thing. With Airbnb, it has many more properties. It's been around obviously a lot less. It doesn't have inventory. It's got a 9x market cap or so. But beyond that, when the World Cup comes to Sao Paulo, or the Olympics come to London, or the superstorm comes to who knows where, the sudden urgent need for more shelter cannot be accomplished by the model from the 20th century because it's not resilient. It's not on demand. Airbnb can actually do a call to its hosts and many more hosts for supply. And so these models that are, excuse me, more resilient in many ways are also like what we call asset light. They work on more of a platform model. It's not vertically integrated. It's about access to, not ownership of. In nature and in business, especially now, what we're seeing is the more diversity, the more resilience. If I ask that with the same kind of orientation of the life cycle, where does your product revenue come from today? Where's the bulk of the revenue come from? Is it on the value capture side? Most probably it is. And then what are you doing on the value creation side in terms of partnerships and experimentation, new products, et cetera, to make sure that you're going to have kind of what you want to see here is a kind of portfolio approach so that you're not everything aggregated into late stage value capture. As an example, we can look at what happened to Google, a couple of guys trying to mess with Yahoo's search, ultimately create an interesting product that goes public. They have a stable known for Googling something, become aristocrats as search, but then say, instead of sinking into early bureaucracy, we're going to launch a couple of other things. We're going to become Alphabet. We're going to make Google a product line. We're going to create Google X, and we're going to go try crazy ideas that are giant. We're going to have Google Ventures, and we're going to invest in stuff. We're going to do partnerships and learn. And also a really important part of this graph is to show at the very bottom, you see Picasa and glass. It's really important to kill things. One of the things that happens in the century of the generals is people mistake their project for themselves. So they don't want to say, hey, my thing that you gave me some money for, we tried out, it was an experiment, doesn't work. It's terrible. It's not working. It's a bad idea. Let's kill it. I have another idea, or I want 2 months or 3 months to come up with blah, blah thing. Decoupling, like the project didn't work, from I'm a jerk and you should fire me. And so it's really important to kill stuff. It's also great to see here that basically they have a very diverse portfolio. One of the things of the 21st century is it's speed as habit. Like the whole ready, aim thing. By the time if you look at the old like cycle times for generating cars or other products, Walmart, whom I worked with closely for years, the way that they would do their planning, everything has to change because the rhythm of the world has changed. Ask yourself where your competitors are. If you're in bureaucracy and I told you if you're in bureaucracy, it's because you sit in a meeting and everyone else in the meeting with you, this is how you know if you're in. If everyone else in the meeting with you can say no, but you're not sure who can say yes, that's a bureaucracy. If you're in a startup, if everyone can say yes and the idea of saying no doesn't cross your mind, you're in a startup. From future competitor point of view, if you're in bureaucracy and all your competition is also in bureaucracy, my advice is get better competition. Find other people to compete with. find more young, curious, agile, disruptive challenger companies to discover who are they, what are they doing, etc. Because that's where the learning takes place. It's not rubbing up against the people that are all going to sync together. Here, taking another area where I've worked a lot with these companies in fintech, you can see that a lot of the companies that are very well established incumbents have been partnering with or experimenting with or investing, building these other kinds of networks, platforms, communities to understand what's going on here and what's happening so that we don't end up as Barclays or Bank of America holding like all of the regulatory nonsense and I'll have all the high profit, awesome businesses go to these fintech challengers. One quick note also about regulatory bodies. It doesn't work, and I don't know how, I'm imagining you guys are probably regulated. In finance and energy and healthcare, I've worked a lot in all those areas. Everyone wants to use, well, you know, these newcomers aren't regulated, but we are. So that's why we can't innovate. A bunch of caca. I don't believe it for a minute. It's something that is very debilitating if you use that as a shield to keep you from learning. So that's my comment, my very American, not very polite British comment. Culture of learning is also really important because the culture of a company is actually the shape of, it's the platform that makes something possible or not. As an example, BBVA, a bank in Spain that I've worked a bunch with, has a lot of data, and they, use their data for things that help their company. But one of the things that happened that was really awesome is there was a big hurricane in Baja, Mexico, and they had bought a company, a bank, Bancomer in Mexico. Anyway, the short version of the story is BBVA data team teamed up with the UN, and when the hurricane hit, they shared their ATM, their automatic banking and point of sale data so that we could actually see which communities within Baja lit up first or which didn't light up at all. And then that could help to direct the UN and Red Cross and other groups to help the communities because communication had gone down. So I'm using this just to say that there's ways, if you're a very profit-oriented company, there's plenty of ways to collaborate with other organizations that allow people, that the fact that BBVA did that was so seductive to attract really awesome data scientists to the company. Data scientists are like the gold, they're really hard to find, they're really hard to attract. But if you have some sexy project that's contributing to community, that's something that people really care about. And so as much as data scientists were repelled by the idea of going to work for a big bank, they were completely excited about the idea of contributing to all of us. And more, that's the model. And that's a part of a culture that is really important to attract and retain awesome talent. And then so you could ask yourself, where does your company culture fall? Is it on the close, don't tell me, talk to me this way, you can't talk to him, he's my boss, not your, that? Or is it a really open, super collaborative model on the left side? One of the important things about the 21st century models and ways of thinking, when we know the world is changing so quickly, is what in the digital business we call the network effect. So at Ophoto, I paid for one customer. We were all at a party together because Ian invited us out for cocktails finally. I took lots of pictures of everyone, shared it with you guys, and you all thought you looked really cute. So you started to buy your own photos, but also share those photos with other people. Generally with Ophoto, we paid for one customer and got 5 for free. If you think about things like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Netflix, the network effect of like, how do you make a product, the product learns, or Google, we've used Google, all of us, I'm sure, in the last day. We are helping to make Google better. Every time we search, the next time someone else searches, the results are going to be better because it's using all the data. We're all contributing. We're all part of the production system. And so we need models in the 21st century. We need models like that, because if you have a centralized production system and you're trying to use manpower, in quotes, to fight a kind of dispersed, decentralized, diverse community of people using products and sharing data and learning together, good luck. And an example is even what we just came across, which is a reverse example using the network effect, is the pandemic. The viral, what we used to call the viral reaction, or the viral response, or getting something to go viral on the internet. In fact, going viral is exactly what happened to us. And so the speed of the virus transmission started to be at the network effect. Then the question is, how do we get the benefits of that, as well as how do we anticipate the downside of that in communities, around housing, because the network effect with climate or with the virus also has a negative consequence. So it's a lot for me about asking, again, who are we connected to? Because in my mind, I'm only as good as the networks and the people that I'm connected to. If I'm super connected and I have the right to access people who are brilliant or who are massively pathologically curious, I can ask them and reach into, networks in Africa or in southern Chile within an hour. And that's kind of what you want. That's kind of what we're building towards, because climate and virus and finance and governance and all of this is borderless at the moment, even though for many of us, we work and live in very community, regional situations. I know I'm probably running out of time, but I know, given the business that you're doing, that the focus on the idea of decarbonization is a massive way to reduce risk and increase value. And how to do that by thinking differently about water and energy and communities, I think there's a ton of opportunity in there. Obviously, housing, waste, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of other components. But when Ian told me a little bit about what you all work on, I got super enthusiastic. So maybe I'm overly caffeinated as well. But I have to say that for me, I have this little moniker, which is, in the 20th century, companies aspired to be whales, big and hard to move around. So it's a stable, rigid, good thing. But I feel that we're at this inflection point where we absolutely have to move from being whales to schools of fish, to moving together and coming apart when we need to being able to bring groups together and to tap into the right questions and resources. For us, we're in this inflection point where we literally, if I say, what's going to happen next, my answer is like, I have no idea. But you can say that in two ways. It's like, oh my God, I have no idea. I'm so stressed. I can't. Or you're like, wow, you know what? I have no idea, but we're in this 5 different experiments and we're learning. In the end, for me, it comes to, we're better to be curious than afraid. And these are really our only 2 choices. I know that you're working also in communities, and I think you have the opportunity for what I refer to as a real brand echo, the opportunity to really leave something brilliant. And I'm quite confident that you're working towards that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions, or at least facial expressions.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I love that that final quote there. They tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. I think there's lots of seeds within the social housing world that are out there, which I hope sort of come to blossom in the years to come. So if you could just sort of stop sharing the
Oh yeah, of course. I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm
we'll get you
playing with my
back on
mouse.
screen there. So we've had loads of good comments and points sort of coming through on the chat there. We've got about 30 minutes to sort of dissect some of the issues that you sort of raised there. And there is so many, but I'm going to ask a question from one of the members. Ian Whitwell asked about where do you think Amazon is on that life cycle chart?
Where I think they are versus where I hope they are. I think that they're somewhere there. I think they're in a bureaucracy for sure. That's for sure. I think that they have been experimental in ways, like they made this, investment in Rivian, the EV. They're doing lots of stores, different instantiations of how to explore the future of commerce. So they make acquisitions, they make investments, they have some activity on the left side. I would say, they're early bureaucracy, but they have a footprint in the, in the value creation side. There's a lot of activity that's going on that Amazon is not taking part in. Some of that's coming from the likes of Shopify and WooCommerce that is playing more to resellers and saying, hey, you guys are getting, Amazon's been called out for stealing basically some of their sellers' products. So, there's an interesting positioning, which is Toby at Shopify and Matt at WooCommerce. They're both kind of saying, we're optimizing for resellers. So if you're a seller, you should be working with us because we're not going to steal your products, right? So Amazon's getting pressure. You see Shopify is massively growing, but it's just such a behemoth. And it's, it has other profit angles besides, so AWS famously, but also Alexa, and that whole business of moving to capture data from us without maybe even people knowing. So I think I would place them. Yeah, I think they're in early bureaucracy, and their model is being. I think the company as a collection of assets is in early bureaucracy. I think the model of extraction that they use is definitely in bureaucracy.
And just picking up that point around sort of value and purpose and impact. Obviously, we work in the social housing space. Our purpose is to house people safely and in affordable sort of homes and things like that. But where do you think, I suppose, as a business driver, where do you see purpose and impact coming into organizations? You mentioned there about, climate and net zero and things like that. Do you think this is going to be something that grows? Because it doesn't always, sit well with the bottom line and our need to make a profit.
Yeah. Well, I think, nature bats last, right? Like, so I will tell you, I moved between California and northern Italy. And in California, I was living for a long time in Napa Valley. We were evacuated 5 times in the last 7 years. When it comes closer to home, it stops being like a friend of mine in the medical business, who's a doctor, one time said to me, minor surgery is when they do it to someone else. Climate change as a theory is when it happens over there. But when you start to actually see the things coming closer, I think people get more and more serious. And the problem is that you can't have infrastructure. So I think that the organizations that are supposed to be acting on behalf of the society or the community are have a kind of fiduciary duty to be the adults in the room, because people, your point is absolutely true. And I don't know maybe enough about how your organizations are evaluated, or who are the shareholders of, of the assets, or who are you reporting the financial outcomes to. But what I would say is that climate is becoming a lot less, like if you look at the surveys and you look, and I've been actively involved, I should say I'm actively involved in climate for 30 years. So it's not, it's really moved from being, oh, you guys are getting so worked up about this, to, wow, this is really a thing that we're going to have to be concerned about. And it hits on all sorts of, immigration, migrations, because people will have to move because of some places becoming uninhabitable, to just practical, and there's lots of examples, I would say. For even yesterday, I read Ithaca, New York, which is, in upstate New York, small town, small city, decided that they are going to make all of their public buildings, everything is net zero. And the entire community got behind it. There's a community in Austria that's using all, so community, but I actually think that, since you asked this question, my opinion is that the no more, not yet, one of the no mores that's no mooring are national governments, and that the federal governments and the old borders and the old institutions aren't getting it done like they did, 10 years ago. So I think that the molecule that has so much power are the cities and the communities. That's where real activity is going to happen, I think. Okay. Reducing risk has to, so from a profitability perspective, the other thing I would say to you is, one of the companies I invested in about 10 years ago was called Honest Buildings. We just sold it to a public company. But the general theory, the guys that started it were from Tishman Speyer, and they ran their sustainability portfolio. And what they realized is that in any, whether it's residential or commercial space, if you make the space more resilient, in other words, it's got solar or wind or some kind of renewable energy, the quality of air inside and outside is better. The water is filtered, or there's sensors, so you're not wasting. All of these sorts of things, they invested. They did a lot of, you can imagine, very rigorous financial analysis of making TIs on this building or that building and what happens. And the outcomes were astonishing. Like the per square foot or the per month price more than covered the investment in the near term, more than covered the investment in the upgrades. Okay. So it's a very community by community. And the other piece I would say is the technology, the sensor technology, and the other things that were costing. I used to have one on my desk here to show when I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but the sensor was like this big, right? And it costs $2,000. And now the sensor, of course, is like this big, and it costs like $100 or less. So, I think that we have to, okay. And it's just, I don't know where courage comes from. I don't know if the courage needs to come. It rarely comes from top down, from really top down, meaning boards that control a small entity. So Ian, how are these organizations? Are they funded from public taxes?
The business model is quite simple in terms of 80% of day-to-day income is guaranteed through benefits through government, but they also raise income through building. So part of the driver is we build, and the margins they get from that are then reinvested in building more homes as well. So we've got a stake in this. But can I sort of link this to one of the questions about you mentioned about this in your presentation around regulation? There's a phrase called homologation, which is where the regulator actually drives innovation. And I was reading an example the other week about where this is in the world of Formula One racing. It's the regulator who drives innovation. I just wondered, we're a heavily regulated sector. You work in heavily regulated sectors like finance and fintech and places like that. Do you think there's ever a case where because you've given one side of the coin that, you know, people use regulation as an excuse for not innovating. Do you ever think regulation can act as an innovator or as a driver for change?
It can, if you have regulators that are willing to say, this isn't what we have isn't sufficient, and doing, so the thing about regulators in general, they're sent up from central casting as Dr. No, right? So the ways, like in finance, we worked with regulators hand in hand to talk to them about crypto and explain blockchain and explain really kind of digital custodial banking. But we invested in, we basically brought together what we call the shapers, people who are generally regulators or the head of compliance in the banks, and sat down with them and said, you know, what if the future isn't like the past and you're tapping the brakes at the wrong time and you're keeping innovation from happening, but also you're not seeing the opportunities to regulate the things that are happening that are going to make an even bigger mess. And so you see all the blood go out of their face, and then we start to have real conversations, and they're not antagonistic, they're educational and in two-way educational. You know, well, we don't like this because, well, we don't understand how we would value that, or we don't understand how we would do KYC on that, you know. So then you can say, okay, well, what if we were able to show you this piece of data? Or what if you had access to these kinds of organizations? Oh, that might change it. So there, I think there's two things in your question. One is that the regulators should see, ideally, we want to invite the regulators into a conversation about making our communities and our financial world and our health more resilient. And where things are changing, you know, we want you guys to be part of this conversation. That's number one. So I think there has to be kind of two-way, a partnership. I haven't met a regulator who themselves is innovating. In my experience, like, it's funny that you mentioned Formula One. A good friend of mine is the son of Emo Fittipaldi. He's a Brazilian race car driver. I mean, famous, I guess. I'm not a Formula One person, but I guess Emerson Fittipaldi is a well-known beast. So Emo, I was in Brazil and I was doing talks, and Emo came, and he said that it was really interesting to him because when he started to drive the Lotus, the first one that he drove, he had a co-pilot. And I was like, a co-pilot? What does the co-pilot do? He said basically the entire time the co-pilot turns around and he goes, go faster, go faster. I said, so the co-pilot was replaced by a rear view mirror? And he says, exactly. You know, like, then he said basically, and this is the partnership between Formula One and regulators. Formula One came up with seatbelts, airbags, yep, ABS brakes, whatever you call those, shatterproof windscreens, all these kinds, roll bars, all those things came from Formula One because they worked, you know, in that circumstance, extreme. So obviously, even with my driving, they'll work pretty well. And so that makes that kind of partnership where you can, so for example, I was wondering when we talked the last time, whether different groups, because you guys are regional, if people can collaborate, if there's work groups, if you can come together to do, you know, tests and experiments, can you create, you know, different different models, or build like a demonstration tiny house, that like I worked with a group in Copenhagen 10 years ago that did, 2 or 3 little demonstrations that were in, I want to say 30 meter, 35 meter kind of setup. And they were amazing. And then another guy did the same thing in New York. A guy who started Tree Hugger built out apartments in New York that where the walls slid or the bed came down. It was really small space, but amazing. And anyway, so I think that to answer your question, I think that the regulators are going to miss the risk if they don't change the lens. And if there's an opportunity for you all, and I'll say you, Ian, to invite regulators into the conversation, I think that would be a giant step forward, because their ability to change their spidey sense about where the danger lies or where the opportunity lies would be really important to enable this transformation.
Well, we are trying, and again, I mean, you mentioned about sort of looking and test and learn. That's a huge part of what we do.
Yeah. Test
before you invest. The challenge is it's not something as a sector we readily do. So it's a bit of an education, this, but there's quite a few areas I want to sort of cover, and I'm conscious of the time around this. I do want to come back to you about the speed as a habit, but I've noticed that Matthew Gardner has actually asked a question there. So Matthew, I wonder if you could just switch your camera on and your microphone, and if you wouldn't mind asking Lisa your question.
Yeah, hi Lisa.
Hi Matthew.
So I think that our sector is probably driven more by the fable of the tortoise and the hare than by the concept of speed as a habit. And I guess I just wonder kind of how that entrenched belief that anything that is fast is necessarily dangerous, whether it's a rapidly devised vaccination for COVID or a new approach inside a social housing organization. There's this kind of worry that sits inside people's heads, particularly organizations that are in the bureaucratic stage of their life cycle, that speed is really something to be avoided. What are the best organizations doing to change that?
So I think that it's a great question. And I thought you were going to ask me something easier, because that's why I sent you that Venmo payment. But in lieu of that, I'll answer what you asked. I think that, so if an organization is siloed, and by that I mean, so let's take your vaccination as an example, because it's a very spicy topic these days. If all we're doing is making something and then saying, okay, we're in a hurry, we think this will work, give it a whirl, okay? It's a spaceship, it's a car, put it on the motorway, it's a vaccine, put it into the public health system, whatever. The fact is that it's like the difference between the testing and the reporting and the analysis of the risk being low enough is made through one set of glasses, and the declaration by the people that you're referring to is made with a different set of glasses. And for me, what's missing for them is the notion that, in fact, we're using the data from many other things that are like, they don't probably have an appreciation for how AI works, or how much data there really is in the world, how much data each of us spew every day when we just take our phones and walk around. I always refer to myself as like, a data spewing latte with legs, like I'm walking around with this thing with a coffee all over cities, and it's a fountain, so when the vaccine comes out, or when you say, I think that this is going to work well because I'm connected to these colleagues all over the world, and they've had similar experiences with this product or this approach, and this is what they've done. And it's not super risky, because the risk has been reduced, because it's, even though we don't have the 5 years to spend, but over the 5 years, we would have N number of hours of testing this thing. As it turns out, because we have 300 organizations around the world testing it, now we've got that, we get the same data in 2 weeks. And yes, it's not apples to apples exactly, but it brings the risk from 100 down to maybe 20. And that with that 20, we'll spend another N number of months fine tuning, but it's not taking it from this crude concept to something perfect. It's getting it to, I don't know if that's making sense. But my point is basically, like, so for example, with BBVA and the UN example, the data that was captured through one lens, hey, we're a bank, we want to see how you're spending money when you go to your automatic bank, or when you go to pay for something with your debit card, and we get all this data. We use it for our purposes. They didn't envision that they would collaborate with the UN and be able to tell which communities were the most at risk, or where people needed help the most, or to proactively create a new product on the fly and say, since we know that these 3,000 people went to the hospital last night and now are going to need, a loan to pay for something, we're going to proactively give them a very generous loan for X, because we know that they're suffering. And doing those kinds of things, because you have the data, enables, so it doesn't mean that so you don't need to test things in the same, with the 20th century lens. You can get the same amount of exposure, and probably more, more exposure, more testing, more. It's like the Google example. All of us are working to make Google better, but none of us are working better to make your housing situation better.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question, I'll give you an example of a company that I work with that's in, and by disclosure, I'm an investor in, that's in the UK. It's two women, actually now one is the CEO, called Robin Scott, and the company is called apolitical.co. And they basically, her concept was, we want to put people who are working in the public sector, who are public servants, together in a special platform, so that they have a lot of trust for each other. And if I'm doing this project in New Zealand or in Australia or in Santiago de Chile, we can share things with each other of what's working, what's not working, who in your organization can I talk to? How did you guys solve for this? And and so to the point, Apolitical is creating this platform and classes and trainings and other sorts of tools for people working in the public sector, so that they can experience the network effect. Because we don't, right now, government is a giant laggard, and the world is moving ahead, doing like these little projects, trying to figure out how to make things work. And the government will come back around afterwards, perhaps, and make a declaration. But in your situation, it feels like you need more of a network. And I know that that's all about what Ian is doing. And I think it's so vital that you go deeper and more intimate and more honest and more vulnerable, and kind of start to experiment in ways, because it, like the people, Matthew, the people that say to you, no way, this isn't tested enough. Can you, like, what is it? A technology? Is it a business model? Is it, what's it in, like, as an example?
I guess it can be any of those things.
Okay. Wow.
I don't think there would be a single thing that would apply for the whole of the social housing sector in the UK.
Yeah.
But it could. I mean, my particular interest is around technology, and I think there is a lot around technology. But I think business models are just as relevant.
Yeah.
Skills are just as relevant.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that, for example, do you have to, so here's a weird idea. Do you guys use things like hackathons?
Yes, we have. Yes.
You know, I think like inviting the breaks, whoever's running the breaks, to participate and to see kind of, if you have a good result in a hackathon where you have propositions and a very succinct, you know, here's the problem, here's the solution that we came up with here, here's our current best solution, here's the cost of the current solution, here's the, you know, here's the efficiency, here's the da-da-da, here, whatever. And then this is the promise of the new thing. Can we afford to ignore this? Can we really afford to ignore the opportunity and just say, disregard it completely? Or can we start to, can we agree that if we build one of these, test it, you know, that this is now something that can scale? I mean, when friends of mine in the honest buildings business were doing big projects, you know, there would be like an inflection point. Hey, we have 3 months to come up with a model and a technology that will perform at this level. So there's a spec. It has to perform at this level, cost this much, do blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we'll be willing to go with it. You don't have people that are willing to specify what the conditions are?
I think the challenge we have, Lisa, is we've probably got more pilots than American Airlines going on.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and the challenge is that how do we then scale them?
Get the pilots from, yeah.
You know,
kids don't try this at home too.
Yeah, and I think the life cycle of where social housing is, and we see this, and we were doing some analysis of this recently, that actually a lot of the new leaders who are coming in invariably have a financial background, because the boards are looking at it through the lens of actually we're in disrupted times. Just mute your mic there, please.
I thought she was sleeping.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Yeah, so we've got this issue. You know, that actually we're trying to drive towards stability, when, you know, your point is we're trying to get speed as a habit. We've got very, very limited time left, but I just wondered what your views were then around 21st century of what the future of the workspace is going to look like, because you've talked about this decentralized sort of network and ecosystems. A lot of our members, you know, have real estate, have office accommodation and things like that. So we're stuck between this sort of, please come back into the office, or actually it's okay to sort of work from home. And we, you know, as human beings, we need that interaction. We need that face-to-face interaction. I just wondered if you could sort of share with us what your view is around the future of the workspace.
God, you always ask these giant questions with, yeah, sure. I mean, I would say there's two things. One is, I would optimize my answer for talent and the attraction and retention of talent. If, like, for example, I know that friends of mine who are data scientists or who are UX designers or who are crypto people, all really complicated things, or sensor designers, generally they want to live anywhere they want, and they want to work, you know, like this, and they have a community. They go in and out of places. So if I'm in London, I might hit up you or Matthew and say, hey, I'm going to be there for a month. Can I work from a place sometimes, or can I have meetings sometimes? And so that might be an alternative business model to look into. And friends of mine in the UK started, it's called Third. I'll send you their link, because I spaced out at the moment, but it's Third Space, and it's out of London, and they've been doing like these community physical spaces for the future of work, and it includes running event programs and community programs and using the physical building. So it's decoupling work from the physical building, and I think that that's an important aspect, because when I'm writing or thinking, or I want to read and have a conversation with someone for several hours, I can do it at work, but it's not optimized there. It's better for me to do it somewhere else. And it used to be that I did it in cafes, or I would take a conference room in a workspace. Now I can do it from home and show up at the office and have meetings with people. And so it's kind of decoupled a bit. In terms of your circumstance where you have a staff, I don't know how important the getting everyone together. And I think there is an important aspect, at least kind of with some rhythm, where human beings are social beings and want to see each other and hang out and walk around and blah, blah. So, keeping some kind of pattern where there's the ability to either use the office, because not everyone has a space in their home or has too much other stuff going on in their home to be forced to have an office there as well.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of like, and I've seen it solved in a lot of different ways, and it's changing a lot in two things. The way that teams are working together, and the way that the value of space and the way office space is taking shape. So I think that there's potentially, if you own those offices, there may be other business models where you can open them up to other groups. And I'm happy to send you the link to my friends who have done really interesting projects. But also, go ahead.
No, I'm just conscious of the time. I mean, if you could share that with us, Lisa, that would be absolutely brilliant. And I think you're right. You've summarized it really well. We are on a journey here, trying to find out what's going to work in a very, very different world post COVID around that. But we have reached the end of our time. We could have gone on all day. We could have spent many hours sort of exploring a lot of the areas that you've sort of talked about there. But I just wonder, colleagues, if we could again just switch our microphones on. You can switch them on now. You can mute them all. And can we just give Lisa a really, really loud round of applause, please, for a time there?
Thanks, guys. It's nice to see you.
No, thank you, Lisa, and I do hope we can work together again in the future. I really do appreciate you giving us your time, and
of course, yeah.
And hopefully we can see you in person next time you come across to the UK as well.
That would be great. One thing I would just say, I'm more than happy also if you guys have crazy questions or want some introductions. I wonder whether, for example, Apolitical is a good ally or not, because they have a fairly large network. Like I have more questions. Having talked to you, I'm leaving with more questions than answers. So I guess.
Well, look, 22 is just around the corner. I'm sure we can find some way to sort of get you engaged with the network and with members as well, because I think we've got a lot to learn and also a lot to share as well.
Yeah, I'm just really intrigued by, I think the challenge that you have and the opportunity are immense. I mean, I'm very bullish on the concept. It's not, Americans are much more crude. I've always told Ian, my Philadelphia accent up against his lovely one. But Americans, the whole sort of trust that you set up and how they work, I think is really brilliant. So I know it needs a bit of a jiggle and a facelift. So I'll be looking forward to hearing how you accomplish that.
Brilliant. All right, then, Lisa.
Thank you for the invitation, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Well, colleagues.
Take care, everyone.
There we go. That's the end of the second session that we've got. Thankfully, you'll be pleased to know you're not going to have to see me sitting in the studio, because if you're coming along to our third session with Joe Sadar, employee number 9 at Airbnb, later on this afternoon, you'll be transported to a different studio with a different host there. But again, loads of learning to come this afternoon as well. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I've certainly got a lot out of that, and hopefully something we can work with Lisa on into the future. I'm off to cook some vegetarian meatballs with couscous with Gino just over here to my right. Until then, have a good lunch, and we'll see you soon.